Politics is a powerful weapon in sport. You can get rules changed to suit yourself, you can get prize money sorted out to suit yourself, and other bits and pieces that can help you gain a competitive edge. In Formula 1, the kings of this are Ferrari. They just are. They're F1's longest standing team, even though they've not been at every single race in the F1 World Championship. They've also had things go in their favour thanks to that long-standing nature. Their relationship with the sport's governing body also helps. Vetoes, 100 million just for turning up, the sort of stuff that's, well, common knowledge really. And it's not just Ferrari, because other teams have flexed their muscles to try and get what they want, usually with quit threats. During the 2015 season, Red Bull started demanding that the engine rules be changed or they quit, as their Renault power plant wasn't as good as the offerings from Ferrari and Mercedes, and there's less overt pressure put on, and it has been put on by the likes of Renault and Benetton with Flavio Briatore, Mercedes with Toto Wolff, and probably at some point Williams with Sir Frank. But that's politics within the sport. Today we're looking at politics within your own country, which is what Guy Ligier was able to take advantage of when he had his eponymous Formula 1 team. This is one of the videos that's been lost to history, one of those old put blaring copyright-free rock music in the background and talk while a model in a Assetto Corsa goes around a track type of videos. It's due an update, let's be honest. Better written, has fewer historical blunders, and jokes that aren't so cringe that I'm glad it's gone. But either way, Guy Ligier was born in 1930 in Vichy, France. Vichy itself would lend its name to a rump state of France when the country was annexed by Germany in the Second World War, which wouldn't kick off for another few years. It's one of those bits of history that could easily occupy a 15 video of its own, really, but this is motorsport history rather than military history. But like I say, this is 1930, so we are pre-war at this time. So Ligier was born in Vichy, in France, rather than Vichy France, the rump state headed by Marshal Philippe Pétain that was collaborating with Mr H's occupied France. Ligier had started his working life as a butcher when he left school as a teenager. On top of this, while doing his national service, he was good enough to play rugby for the French army and was also a champion rower. And using the money he'd accumulated through being a butcher's assistant, he was able to start his own construction company in 1960. Thanks to being friends with the mayor of Vichy, Ligier's construction company, Ligier Travaux Publics, was able to score the contracts to build motorways in the area, which in turn made his company boom and his personal wealth increase. In just 1 year, he had 1,200 employees and 500 machines, and was also building bridges, dams, and so much more. On top of this, 2 more local contacts for him were Pierre Berégevy and François Mitterrand. I also apologise for any butchering, lol topical pronunciations of French names in this video. I did Spanish at school. But one of Ligier's passions besides rowing and rugby was racing. He'd had a dabble on motorbikes in the late 1950s, winning the French 500cc motorbike championships in 1959 and 1960, just before the construction business started, and later boomed. Later, in the mid to late 1960s, he was racing Porsches, and was 7th at the 1964 Le Mans 24 Hour in a 904 Carrera GTS. This attracted the attention of Ford's French subsidiary, and they put him in a Mustang GT350 for the 1966 Rallye de Route du Nord, Rally of the Northern Routes, or something like that. That same year, 1966, he was a privateer entry into the Formula 1 World Championship, and if you've got the 1966 mod installed on your Grand Prix Legends install, then you'll have no doubt seen his name turn up a few times. He bought a Cooper Maserati T81 and ran it in the 1966 Monaco Grand Prix. But his open-wheel career wasn't that good. 5 Formula 1 starts, nil points. He had another friend called Joe Schlesser, and the pair started importing Ford Shelby product into France. Schlesser had come to Ligier's aid when the latter had suffered a massive crash in practice for a race at Hockenheim. In the accident, Ligier had broken his knee, and doctors wanted to amputate, but Schlesser was able to convince them not to do so. Just before the accident, Ligier had been 5th in the Nürburgring 1000, but it wasn't the knee injury that ended Ligier's racing career. It was an accident that didn't even involve him. In 1968, at the French Grand Prix at Rouen, Schlesser was driving the short-lived, highly controversial and dangerous RA302, known as the Magnesium Honda. Schlesser slid off the wet road, flipped the car, and several gallons of fuel, oil, gearbox fluid, the magnesium bodywork, and Schlesser were incinerated, as the magnesium was lit by the hot flames that were caused by the fuel being ignited. The race continued while the car had to burn itself out, as the firefighters pouring more water on made the inferno worse, as did the falling rain. So Ligier was out of racing, so instead of racing started a car company instead, trying to honour both his dead friend and his own dreams of building a good sports car. Ligier built the JS1 prototype before switching to the JS2, with the JS chassis being a tribute to Schlesser. The JS2 was a road car powered by a Maserati V6, while the JS3, a track car, had the DFV. So with some more money in the bank off the back of his businesses, Ligier was quick to swoop in and buy the remains of Equipe Matra, the racing division of the French car company that had won the drivers and constructors titles in 1969 with Jackie Stewart and Ken Tyrrell. Fun fact time, it's the only car that isn't a Ferrari to be built outside of the UK that has won the constructors title. In doing so, Ligier had acquired a racing team that sort of knew what it was doing, and had also managed to secure the services of Gerard Ducarouge. Equipe Ligier was formed in 1976 and initially had backing from the French oil company ELF, I'll just say ELF, that had been formed back in 1967 and had been a long-time partner of Jackie Stewart and Tyrrell before Ligier came into the sport. Also, at this time, France had been quite unsuccessful in motor racing due to declining interest in the sport after the Second World War. The British and the Italians, as well as the Americans to an extent, had become the dominant nations. A French-built car had not won at Le Mans since 1950, and there hadn't been a French driver winning at Le Mans since 1964, when Jean Guichet had won in a Ferrari. Meanwhile, in Formula 1, there had only been 2 French winners in the sport since the World Championship was started in 1950, Maurice Trintignant and François Sévère. Yes, Matra had won in 1969, but it was a British driver, British team manager, British HQ, British mechanics, and an Anglo-American engine. The only thing French about it was the chassis and the second driver. In 1977, Ligier had its first success when Jacques Laffite won the 1977 Swedish Grand Prix. It was the first for a French driver since 1971. It was the first for an all-French team, so French driver, French car, and French chassis, because it had a Matra V12 in the back. But it was 1979 and 1980 that Ligier was properly successful. In 1979, the ground effect JS11 powered by the DFV took Ligier to 3rd in the constructors with 61 points scored and 3 wins split between Patrick Depailler and Jacques Laffite. In 1980, they went one better still, getting 2nd in the constructors as Didier Pironi and Laffite scored 66 points between them, although the team had one less win on the board. In 1981, Ligier's old friend François Mitterrand became the president of France, and even before this, Ligier had used his contacts within French politics to obtain sponsorship from a lot of French companies, many of which were state-owned, such as Elf, Gitane, the cigarette company, and others. Tobacco advertising was illegal in France, but Ligier was given special dispensation to be able to display that branding at tracks around the world, although these logos would be censored in France along with everybody else's. Elf had also been sponsoring a lot of the newer French talents coming through the ranks. This was then matched by Renault having more of a presence in Formula 1, and there was an explosion of French drivers who would drive for Renault, Ligier, or both. Depailler, Chapuis, Arnoux, Jarier, Pironi, and Tombe all had rides at Ligier at some point. In 1983 though, Ligier started to fall on hard times, and Mitterrand ensured the team's survival by basically ordering those same state-owned companies in Gitane, Elf, the French National Lottery, and Renault to help out. In doing so, Ligier not only got free Renault engines, but also had first preference when it came to engine supply. In doing so, Ligier pretty much became the French national team. Renault withdrew at the end of 1985, and the Alfa Romeo partnership that came after was short-lived, thanks to René Arnoux being quite a harsh critic. The team then had a string of engine deals with Megatron, which were just rebadged BMWs, Judd and Cosworth. Ligier didn't score any points between 1987 and 1981, but in 1990 they got the biggest leg up they could possibly get, all due to how they knew certain Frenchmen in certain powerful positions. In 1990, the Larousse team, a team of fellow French, were disqualified from the Constructors' Championship due to an honest error in filling out the paperwork. In this season, the car had been built by Lola rather than in-house, but on the paperwork, someone had either misunderstood what the paperwork wanted them to note down, or it was an honest mistake in what they believed was the case, if you can follow me here. The TLDR is, whoever filled in the paperwork had put the constructor down as Larousse, because that's how we refer to the teams. We refer to them as the constructors. It was the Alfa Romeo team officially, but Sauber was the constructor. In the 1990s, this wasn't uncommon. There was the Scuderia BMS team, but the constructor was down as Dallara. Same with Larousse. Larousse was the team, but Lola was the constructor. So in doing so, Larousse had committed quite the admin error, and they were disqualified from 10th in the Constructors' Championship. Ligier, who were 11th, were promoted into 10th, and in doing so, they were eligible for all of the travel subsidies that came with it, and the prize money. It's thought that this was a political thing because you had a French team with French state-owned companies sponsoring it, and the guy that owns that team is mates with the French president, and the president of the French FIA was also French. It's made even worse when the team was bumped up to 10th despite having 0 points on the board. All very convenient, and if your name is Gerard Larousse, who had problems of his own, he was probably quite miffed. But support at this time was starting to waver. Ligier had the same Renault engines as the Williams team, but Williams was doing way better, and came close to winning the championship in 1991, but dominated in 1992. The only thing that kept Ligier functioning was that Mitterrand was continuing to win elections, being re-elected in 1988. The French lottery continued to give money to the team, but the logos were removed, because they wanted to be associated with winners, and Ligier wasn't winning. Ligier was given another lifeline around the late 80s and into the early 90s due to another one of his mates. I've mentioned Mitterrand a few times, but we need to bring the other one back in here, Pierre Bérégovoy. In 1981, when Mitterrand became president, Bérégovoy was made the Secretary General. The following year, he was the Minister of Social Affairs and was one of the more socialist politicians in the party that wanted Mitterrand to ditch the then EEC's monetary system to carry on with the economic policies. Eventually, though, he relented and things carried on as they were. Basically, what this policy was that before the euro came into effect, the countries in the EEC linked their currencies to protect against massive fluctuations in value. Although when the euro was adopted, a newer version of this monetary system came into effect that linked the euro, the pound and the krona. The EEC evolved to become the European Union in 1993. Bérégovoy had become the mayor of a small town called Nevers in a rural part of France about 90 miles to the west of Dijon. The nearby track had become a racing school, and the French drivers backed by Renault and Elf had come up through it at one point or another, and it was built up into the 1970s. But by the 1980s, the track was in a sorry state. Bérégovoy and Mitterrand had a friend in a woman called Madame Bernigaud. Bernigaud, again, I do apologise, and that's not a piss take with Bernie Ecclestone, that's her name. She was the wife of the guy who owned the track, and she'd recently become widowed, and she was able to do some wrangling with the two men, one of whom now the mayor of the nearby town, and came up with a plan to boost the economy of the region through racing. The track was upgraded and money pumped in, including the switch of the French Grand Prix from Paul Ricard to the Manicourt track, which is the track in question. It was also alleged that Mitterrand had a mistress in the area, and this was all very convenient, sort of pump money to the area, upgrade the racetrack, bring in the tourists, and maybe people would forget he's got a mistress in the area. But either way, the track was upgraded quite a bit, and Ligier got a new HQ, new wind tunnel, and other bits and pieces out of it. Gerard Larousse must have been fuming at this. Also not helping Ligier was a new law passed in the Élysée Palace called Evan's Law, the Loi Evan I think it's called in French, which meant that tobacco and alcohol advertising would be flat out illegal. It was already illegal on TV and billboards, but now it would be banned at sporting events like football, rugby, tennis, and now Formula 1 and other forms of motor racing, on top of things like music festivals. Ligier, like before, was able to dodge the new law. Gerard Larousse was not. The F1 teams like AGS, Larousse and the French football teams in Ligue 1 that were now going to be affected by this law were able to apply for compensation to get back the lost revenue. Every single one of them applied. And they didn't get a single penny. Well, franc. Probably getting a heads up about this law, Ligier sold on to a bloke called Cyril Derouve, who was a French businessman, and Ligier stayed on as an advisor since he had mates on the inside. But this time was short-lived, as Cyril was banged up for fraud and not paying the fines. So in 1994, Ligier sold part of the team to Flavio Briatore and Tom Walkinshaw. Because the majority of the team was now in the hands of a Brit and an Italian, Evan's Law was now dodged through a loophole in the legislation. And then in 1996, Ligier won its final Grand Prix, when Olivier Panis won at Monaco. Not long after this though, Briatore sold his shares to Alain Prost, and Ligier got rid of his stake in 1997. Walkinshaw sold his shares mid-96-ish and ended up taking over Jackie Oliver's footwork team that would be back to being called Arrows in 1997. And all of this came at exactly the right time. Mitterrand got absolutely annihilated in the 1995 presidential elections, and Bérégovoy had shot himself after the Socialist Party had suffered electoral collapse in the 1993 parliamentary elections. To be honest, I don't understand the French political system. Presidential elections and then parliamentary elections. I guess it's like local elections and then what happens on top. A bit like when the Americans elect their governors, every so often, whenever it is. I'll carry on. So Ligier didn't have a friend at the top of the pile in France anymore, so getting rid of the team seemed right. It was also a coincidence then that the new president of France, Jacques Chirac, had made arrangements with Alain Prost to continue having all that French backing on the blue French car that used to be Ligier's. But all that broke down, and this is probably where I can split the Ligier half and the Prost half into two separate videos. The left is helping one guy, and now the right is helping the other guy. It's same thing, different people. Using the money from the sale of the team, Ligier went into the natural fertiliser market of all things and built another fortune, and the Ligier name returned to racing in 2014 when the Ligier JSP2 arrived in the World Endurance Championship. Ligier would die in 2015 at the age of 85. It's all one big mad story, really. It's all a case of who you know rather than what you know, and a case of actual politics. You know, you have the politics of the sport or game that you're in, and, well, like I say, this was actual politics. So then, a look at the Ligier team that used its contacts in the French government to keep itself alive. If this has taught you something new or been a good update of the original video, then do like it so I know I've done a good job. And for more like this, get subscribed with the bell on so you never miss out on anything else I do around here. Massive thanks as ever to the cool dudes at Patreon who support the channel at a more personal level. And if you want to keep the picture purchasing piggy bank topped up, then a link to Patreon is in the description, along with links to Discord, socials, and affiliate links. Well, the super thanks if you just want to do a one and done. So until next time, I've been Millward. Have a great day wherever you are, and goodbye.